you see from your side?
Yes.
So let's come closer. All those in the back row, take a front seat. Okay, so that leg has to be extended. Yeah. That's good. Oh, now we lost Sister Gita. All right. So I need to move this way, actually. Right, Sister Gita is in. Before we start, any questions? Before we start? This started?
Yes.
You can edit it. Before we start, any questions? All right, we can start. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. All right. So we continue with the 7th chapter. We're nearly at the end of it, of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is essentially the first venture into the subject of Bhakti Yoga, the chapter entitled Jnana Vijnana Yoga, the yoga essentially of knowledge and realization. We left off with a review a few things, but we are reminded that it takes many births for us to get to this point, according to Sri Krishna. And then realizing this Vasudeva is all that is. This is the highest possible point of realization that we have. That ultimately, that vast thing, that shining thing that infiltrates, operates, and is present everywhere, in, through, as everything, is the highest, Vasudeva Narayana. If we deviate from that position, then we fall short of our goal, and that is why such a realization is rare, and rare souls are born and rare souls attain this. But Swami Vivekananda says that it is a tragedy, in fact, it is a devastation, if these rare souls are not present in any age. So in every age we assume these souls are present. What prevents us then from getting to this position? As Sri Ramakrishna gives a statement, beholding a diversity is born of delusion. Beholding unity is born of enlightenment. And most of us view things in a diverse way. a separate individualistic way where everything is parts, and part of that is ourselves. We ourselves recognize an individuality and everything else in opposition against that. Sometimes in cooperation, but a defense strategy is there, a confrontational strategy is there, and a yielding strategy is there, whereby we view all the world as different, and that means that we have certain desires within us, and we assume these desires can be granted from other deities other than God. We've already seen how Sri Krishna values all devotees, even if these devotees are looking for material things. So all of us, at some point in time, will want to get some relief from difficulties and stress, problems. We'll want maybe an improvement in our situation. Maybe we want wealth. But of course the highest devotees, just to remind you, are those who love God for God's sake. So what do we do? What do those people do who are devoted to those minor deities and devoid of devotion and wisdom? And what is their way? So this next stanza will tell us. And our fault is essentially lack of discrimination. There are three things that are necessary in spiritual life: the capacity to discriminate between these individualities and this totality, the impermanent, the permanent, and so on. And that's why we have that prayer, Asatoma, Sadgamaya, and so on. Lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. This contrast, really, and the sense of contrasting is what we call discrimination, viveka. And the fact that we do not discriminate in this way, we fall into a trap of delusion, thinking that this world of diversity is the only arena that we have to play in, and that we have to independently struggle ourselves for it. And so it's natural that we take on minor deities, so to speak. But this is a very important thing because we can find out different levels of what these devas mean. Deva, literally shining one, something that is an illuminating factor. And so what we do is we take all the glory which is so manifested everywhere, and we take each ray of glory as its own reality and think it will dispense for us the fulfillment of our desires. We can put this in this way, that these can be classified philosophically as tanmatras, or mere elements, subtle elements that get mobilized by our intentions and thinkings and hopes, our aspirations. Anything that shakes up in the mental field and gets sustained finds its corresponding result. A kind of play that takes place. I was in Germany recently, and there we had snow in April. So somebody commented that the weather's not so good in Ireland, is it? So I said, well, we rarely have snow. Snow seems to be something dead. But of course the sun's rays melt it into a liquid condition, and then the sun rays have the capacity to evaporate that, forming clouds, and deposit it as rainfall again, ready for life. This is the wonderful play that is taking place. So we can see that all these factors we can take separately and think these are different operating forces. But actually it's the same water. Whether it's as snow, whether it is as evaporated vapor, whether it is condensed rainfall, whatever it is, water is water. And so we tend not to look at the ocean, we tend to look at all the surface variations. So the 20th to the 23rd stanzas in this chapter deals with votaries of minor deities. In other words, God's rays of glory understood to be individual. Kameshteshtai Ritanyanaha prabhantyanti jnadeve devataha tam tam niyamam ashtaya prakritya niyata svaya. By desires, by those whose discrimination has been led astray by this or that desire, they go to the limited source of it, seeming limited source of it, described here as other deities. We can take it in maybe a different way, that offices, sub-offices throughout the universe that are responsible for various zones, if you like, within the universe. And if you want something from this zone or that zone, you can pray to them. But it's a bit like asking a very subsidiary local authority for something major. And ultimately, the real power sits behind that as the Lord of the universe. So by those whose discrimination has been led astray, most people, by this or that desire, most people, they go into the lower levels. In other words, they go to the minor gods. They go to the source of the fulfillment of their desires, which is always limited, following this or that rite, because somebody says, please sew a cloth and you'll get this. Please stand on your head and shout Bazonka 3 times, and your health will miraculously change overnight. All these rituals are there. And of course the idea of rituals is, they in themselves they mean nothing unless they're accompanied by some kind of intention. Doubt, of course, will cancel it straight away. Fortunately, we have an operation of time whereby we can think systematically, and time, thought, operates on the basis of 1 thought per second. For that reason, we put a thought in, but we could also put a doubt in, and that cancels it in. So there's certain faith has to be there. Sri Ramakrishna has this to say: healing disease, winning litigation, walking on water, trifling psychic powers such as these appeal most to men of their base make, but the true devotees give no thought to those vulgar things. They are solely intent on gaining the gracious vision of the Lord. So we are looking at not only ordinary everyday needs, but what's happening in post-mortem world as well. So what does the Lord do with these people of mean mentality, foolish endeavors? So he delineates his dispensation like this. And the meter changes. Yo yo yam yam tanu bhaktaha shraddhaya richitam ichati tasya tasya chalam shraddham dhammeva vidyatyam yamham. Whatever form any devotee with faith wishes to worship, I make that faith of his steady. What a generous attitude the Lord has, even though he knows in our ignorance that we are asking for minor things. And then we go on like this. Sataya shraddhaya yuktyas tasya radhanam tati labate cha tata kaman mayeva vihitan. Endowed with that faith, he engages in the worship of that form, whatever form. This is also the basis of harmony of religions. Whatever form we construct for God, even if we construct a ray of God's glory and make that our end-all and be-all, or just construct it for a temporary purpose to fulfill a wish, the faith that is necessary doesn't come from you. A little is there, but the vast majority movement the Lord supplies. And from it he obtains his desires, which are being actually ordained by me, the Lord. And so the useful commentary here: the river, the well, the lake, the spring, these are the sources from which water can be availed of. But the grand source for all of these is the rain, without which all these come to nothing. And similar to this, grace of the Lord, which gives the start, sustenance, and support to all beings. All the needs of all the beings come from the same cosmic source, because there's only one entity there and one cosmic mind. But people of mediocre understanding take it that help comes to them from the deities they worship. And every religion has some version of this. So we think, oh, all right, yes, come and join the circle here. So everybody. Let there be no backseats. So people say, oh, Saint Anthony helped me to find this or that. See, that's the Catholic version of it. And I once had somebody on one of the courses, and we were discussing what the spiritual background was of each one. One person said, oh, I gave up believing in God some time ago. I think it's all superstition. That's fine, all right. Do you believe anything? I'm very keen on angels. I think angels are everything to me. And I read angel cards and whatever those are, and my whole life is dependent on angels. There's another way of saying God's glories in the sense of Bhutas, Tanmatras, and so on and so forth, operating here. And no doubt you'll get something, but please attribute it to the right source. Only one source is there. So what is it that the ignorant seek? We need some explanation. So the fruit that accrues to those people of small intellect is finite. Antavattu param tesham tad bhavatiya tya alpamedasam devan deva jayo yanti madbhakta yanti mam api. But the fruit that accrues to those people, the results that come to those people, of small intellect, limited understanding, of course, is finite. So the bottom line is that spiritualists go to spirits, worshippers of minor forces, you may say rays of glory, they go to that understanding, and the devotees of that central Lord, that comes with it a desire only for the Lord, not for any of those results. They come to me. That makes sense. So, why is it that not everybody seeks that source, what we call Ishvara, the Lord, God? And so the position is explained, and we have to study now some characteristics of what this Lord means. What is Ishvara? Avyaktam vyaktim apanam manyante mam abhutaya param bhavam ajannanto mamam mamavyayam anutamam. Men of poor understanding, think of me, the unmanifest, as having manifestation. That doesn't mean to say it's an error to think of this Lord with a form. Sri Ramakrishna tells us that in answer to some questions. You see, the Lord agrees to form himself as something like ice. And for human understanding, in order to get a grip on what is essentially formless, water will take any form you choose. But for the sake of the devotee, the Lord agrees to take some form. And we may add to the story, the Lord's yearning and the devotee's yearning, the devotee's fire of love, will melt the ice, and what happens is it goes back into the formless. So this is not what we're talking about in terms of thinking of God in a manifested form. It's a good starting position. But of course, the real truth is that this entity is not manifested, just appears to be so. So men of poor understanding, think of me, the unmanifest, as having manifestation. Not knowing my supreme state. What is that supreme state? That is unchangeable, immutable, and unsurpassed, completely supreme. But we value things in terms of local understanding. An example can be given, Sri Ramakrishna's example, that a diamond seller went to the market with a diamond, thinking, I'll get some evaluation and some money for this. He goes to a potato seller and says, how much will you give me? 10 pounds of potatoes. All right. Goes to a cloth seller, how much will you give for this? We'll give you 3 yards of cloth. Then he goes to a diamond merchant who says, we'll give you 3,000 euros. I'm putting it in euros now. So the true value is there from the person who knows. So an incarnation of God, like Sri Krishna, assumes a human body. Jesus assumes a human body. Buddha assumes a human body. Krishna assumes a human body. Just as any bound souls do. But we don't value that entity necessarily as what that entity really is. So I said to people on the retreat, how lucky you are to be here. Because not only have you encountered through an inquiring mind, things such as the Upanishads and the Vedanta and so on and so forth, and come across holy company, and come across other people of like-mindedness, and use the human body constructed vertically, not horizontally, like other animals, in such a way that the nervous system, the mind, everything is developed enough to evolve toward a Godhead. Even luckier if you happen to be born in the era of a great, great giant wave that theology might call avatar incarnation. And supposing we are living in the period of the incarnation of Ramakrishna, we are, if you compare it to Christian terms, living in the 2nd century. And Christianity only developed in the 4th century, fully, only through various circumstances. But prior to that, it was a very minority religion. So this added thing, this added assistance is there. How fortunate are we, and how unfortunate if we don't take full advantage of it. So do we view these particular manifestations of the divine, this great, great wave, do we view it, do we value it as the ocean itself? Or do we value it as just some entity, some historical figure, some embodied entity that has the same ups and downs? After all, the appearance of these entities, born as they are with physical body, with physical pain, etc., just like any other human, it's very easy to take them in a normal, natural way. So we have to understand that, and we also have to, on the basis of that, make sure that we have developed faith in that. Of course, faith comes firstly in ourselves. That's the first thing. In the airport, I saw a wonderful statement on the wall there. It said, "I am Irish. What's your superpower?" And I like that a lot, you see. So we also need to say, you can say it in a devotee's language, I am the child of God. So, what is your advantage? Well, you're also a child of God. We're all children of God. And we all have, therefore, that same advantage. We have to realize it and acknowledge it. Purnananda points this out, that the new definition of atheism is not lack of faith in God, but lack of faith in yourself. And mentions that faith in yourself first, then faith in God, then faith in others, other people. That would be the order of it. So these incarnations, they are born, but they are no more bound in the manifested body than the sky seen through a window is bound within the frame of that window. It looks to be like that, but actually when you see it closely, it's not like that at all. The manifested body of Sri Krishna, for example, is mutable, changeable, no doubt. But in truth, he is the immutable and unsurpassed by the ordinary human beings. And so we have to add, when these incarnations take, they themselves may add, not in your Vedantic sense. I am he, not in your Vedantic sense. His supreme state remains unknown to the people of poor understanding. They do not therefore seek to worship him. So, how can we account for the ignorance of the ordinary man? And even before we go into that, let's labor that point a little. Today there are scholars that dispute the historicity of Jesus, assuming that will invalidate his teaching. But it doesn't. Supposing you doubt the historicity even of Krishna or Ram, then ask this question, should we believe in them? This is what Vivekananda himself asked Sri Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna said something must have been there to last for so many thousands of years, 5,000 years, 3,000 years. In Jesus' case, 2,000 years. Of course, Buddha, we can pretty much validate historically. Muhammad, we can validate historically. But that's not the point. Some great manifestation of God's grace arrived. And when we looked at that entity, we found it is that infinite, immutable, endless, pure consciousness, unlimited, specially arriving, say yada yada hidanmasya, see, from age to age, the cosmic mind brings out its balancing power and rescues the world. Whether we listen or not, Jesus says, those who have ears, let them hear. Of course, some have ears, but don't hear. And so, how can we account for the ignorance of the ordinary person? And we have to say that we are truly ordinary people in that sense. Naham prakashaha sarvasya yoga maya samavritaha mudo yamna vijanati loko mam ajam avyayam. So, I am not revealed to all. There was a small discussion earlier on today. How is it, the purport of the question was, how is it that God doesn't really reveal himself or herself, itself to me? Why does he play like this? So the answer sits here. I am not revealed to all. Why? I am veiled by yoga maya. The deluded world knows me not, the unborn, the unchanging. We superimpose change on the changeless and vice versa. It's a bit like saying, why cannot see the sun when the clouds are moving? Why can I not see the sun? The clouds are in the way. When the clouds are moving off, it looks as if the sun itself is moving. But something is superimposed on something else. And the examples are given there. A fetus is covered by a womb. A fire is covered by smoke. See, the sun is covered by clouds. When these things move off, then we see. It's not that God is not revealing, it's that our ignorance is still remaining. And what is the basis of that ignorance? It was described earlier. This lack of discrimination. The art of tuning into God on the one side, and automatically the valuation of the world adjusts itself. From a devotional point of view, increase of love of God, a yearning heart. This is a formula. Increase of the yearning heart is a decrease of love of the world. Increased love of God, commensurate decreased love of the world. Increased love of the world, diminishment of God. So we can make a formula, DIY, like do it yourself. First thing is required is discrimination. The capacity to see things in its correct perspective. And the opposite side of that is to see God everywhere in everything. Second formula, I. We can put it as renunciation, but renunciation is letting go of this immediately, this sense of ownership, this sense of self-image, this egocentric position. As soon as we let go of that, we have the key to renunciation, because we can renounce everything that supports it. And then finally, why? Yearning. We have to have yearning. This is something that we can measure. We can ask, how much yearning do we have for something? And we know in our own life, whatever we yearn for, we get. Mobilized by these minor deities. Huh? No, you don't get what you want?
Well, there's people starving, they must be yearning for food. So why don't they get food?
Well, there are, of course, other factors involved, but their yearning for food you see, yearning and doubt could be companions. I want food. I doubt in my current condition I can get it. But there are, of course, other factors involved. And we have to take, for example, the effects of the fruits of one's actions as well. But in your own life, never mind about their life, in your own life, if you have a strong desire for something that is not neutralized in the next second, third second, fourth second, will you get it? Why wouldn't you get it? You see, if you know the science of how these things are operating, you'll get it.
Yeah.
The problem is we doubt in the next second. We neutralize it straight away. So if we keep in one strong intention and keep that going, next second, next second, next second, next second, don't worry about the time factor. You see, if you worry about the time factor, you start neutralizing it. Same thing with God. So I'm told that God will come to me, right? Next second, look out the window. No, he's not there yet. Change my religion. Change my religion, change my teacher. Next morning, wake up. No, you're there? No, nothing. This is hopeless. See, every time we do that, this expectations, anticipation of something in the future, we neutralize it and cut it off. That's the point. Same thing, if we are anxious, when will this revelation take place? We're missing the current moment where we enjoy, Lord, you are here. See the phrase Joel Goldsmith uses, that describing, in the context of meditation, describing what is meditation. Meditation is a song of gratitude that God is here, God is now, God is love. As soon as we miss that point and create an expectation or create some kind of career path, so how am I doing in my spirituality compared to last year or last month or yesterday? And when will it come? And do I have to wait for the afterlife? Of course, if you wait for the afterlife, you can make hay while the sun shines and on your deathbed suddenly convert or something, and you get the reward afterwards. It doesn't work like that. So what is the mounting experience which is there? That is why after many, many births, is what's mentioned. Many, many births means there's an accumulation of experience in the evolutionary process. Evolutionary process means that there is a step-by-step built-up learning that takes place. And even if you study things from a biological point of view, biologically evolution will be an accumulation of learning steps, our biologists will tell us. Built up so that we get this current situation made from our own experiences. So, I am not revealed to all means a certain grace is dispensed by me, but we are told, of course, that grace is ever flowing. Can we catch it? Every thought is an expression of God's grace. When we steer it into an avenue called intention, that's also God's grace. Of course, when we doubt it, we're still using the same current. +1, -1, we don't get anyway. So what is this Maya? This Maya is this, and we mentioned it previously, is this paradox presented to ourselves that keeps the game going. And if we didn't have this delusion, this game would stop. So the magician throws a spell on his audience and keeps it in illusion in regard to his performance. But what seems a magic to the onlookers is not so to the family of the magician or the magician's assistant or those who have studied it and know the trick. The nature of his play is well known to himself and his own people. The Lord is a magician who has produced the magic of this world. And magic in two senses. When we look at it closely, it is wonderful. But we also know within this wonder, its true nature is one of changing and one of appearance and disappearance. On this basis, there's no reason to take it seriously. And when we do, this is lack of discrimination. The sun that cannot be hidden by anything seems to be covered by a patch of cloud. Seems to be is the operative word. But that patch itself cannot be located except with the aid of sunlight. So the cloud is the Yoga Maya concealing the sun, and Prakriti or nature made up of these three evolutionary forces, these gunas, is the Yoga Maya of Ishvara. Is Yoga Maya, well actually he remains unaffected by it. And so, Vedaham samatitani vartamanani cha arjuna bhavisyani cha bhutani mam tu veda na kaschana. Kaschana, anyone. So, I know, he says, I know, Arjuna, the beings of the past, the present and the future, but no one knows me, and this is in the context of, don't take me for an ordinary being. Those who are ignorant take me just for flesh and blood, a historical figure perhaps, some kind of teacher that comes and goes. No, my nature is much deeper than that. And to emphasize that, he's saying, I know the beings within all the contexts of time, as far back as you can go, and the present and the future. But in contrast to that, no one knows me. So Ishvara is the Lord of Maya, having complete control over it, not being itself deluded by it. The great magician, the one that puts on the appearance. And not only puts on the appearance, but puts on the appearance himself, appearing as the world from himself, playing his play on himself. Sri Ramakrishna says, it is impossible for the swan to separate milk from water and partake of the former only. The other birds are unable to do this. Ishvara, that is the Lord of the universe, is mingled with this Maya, seemingly mixed up with it. He is non-dual with it. The ordinary people cannot distinguish him from the Maya. But the Paramahansas, this great one, the men of perfection, are able to cognize Ishvara to the exclusion of Maya. So the next question might be, why are people devoid of knowledge and devotion? That's a good question. This becomes analyzed now. And there's a distinction between the discerning people and those who are non-discerning. Icha dvesha samutena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani samoham sarge yanti paramtapa. By the delusion of the pairs of opposites arising from desire and aversion, all beings, everything comes in pairs. This is what makes the delusion, is the pairs of things. Pleasure, pain, in the psychological context or emotional context, praise or blame. In the physical context, heat and cold. In the physics department, it's electron, positron. So everything comes in pairs to the extent that science have proposed that there's something like supersymmetry. That for everything, even antiparticles and so on, there's another corresponding particle. And if that's so, then we can get other things that will complete things, but so far we haven't found it. Nevertheless, broadly, we find these opposites, plus and minus. We find protons and electrons attracted because they're opposite forces. Similarly, we find gravity as a winding in and electrical energy as a winding out. These pairs of opposites are there. And if it wasn't for this, pairs of opposites, dharma, adharma, virtue, vice, good, bad, night, day, sun, moon, if it wasn't for all these opposites, nothing would work. This is the mechanism by which this Maya operates. But it gives us delusion because we prefer one thing over and above anything else. So by the delusion of the pairs of opposites arising, how do they arise from? Desire and aversion. We want to move toward a painless situation, something that would also give us assumed happiness. And we shy away from the negative, providing us with fear and difficulty and pain. That strategy we use to go through life. But it doesn't work, because the things we identified to bring us pleasure really bring us pain, mostly. And even if it doesn't directly, indirectly it does, because it doesn't last very long. What is heaven to a 5-year-old child? A ton of ice cream. Then you might be generous herewith, please accept this ton of ice cream. Within a short period of time the child will complain, no, I had enough of that. It's too cold and it gives me tummy ache. And yet tomorrow morning they're prepared to repeat it. We are simply exactly the same. So, desire and aversion in all beings, it's not just ourselves, all beings share this sustaining element of delusion, which is desire and aversion. And this science calls survival of the fittest. Struggle. We struggle to survive, but of course we become food for other creatures. There's a marvelous creature, the chameleon. Its tongue moves at 15 meters per second, I think it is. Something like that. And it's sticky on the end of it. So an unsuspecting praying mantis, no matter how hard they pray, will be there on the leaf, and the chameleon will just eye it, because it's a rotating eye, can see more than we can, at 360 degrees, and then it sees it, and very, very quickly there it is, finished. Now, of course, the praying mantis' desire is to sit on a leaf and find its own food. And the curiosity about the praying mantis is, of course, in mating, it becomes the food of the female. So this is the advantage that men have in human life, that they don't get consumed by the female. But in a sense, of course, in a sense they do. And of course the chameleon's job is to find things like move and see, oh, praying mantis there, some wiring is inside, built up by experience, this is a delicious gourmet meal. And then you see, it's as if this was a human mind operating, because there's a food, and my timing is right, and then instinctively means all the biology has learned in this species how to do this. So, all Bharata are subject to, what are they subject to? Sham moham, to delusion. And they are subject to this at birth. You see, you get an argument that says that it's called tabula rasa, that babies are born with a blank sheet. They don't know anything, and that all these attitudes, including religion, they learn. But you see, it's not exactly like that. I'm going to tilt this camera a little, because you just have a look at it. This camera is wandering off on its own legs. Yeah, that's better. All right. But this tabula rasa is not accurate, because babies are known to be different even in the womb. You find that the same stimuli is given to the babies through the mother while the mother is pregnant, and you may have two children completely operating in different ways. And even with identical twins, they develop two different personalities, and even physiologists, even though they are exactly genetically identical. So we can't really explain this just through biology. Some accumulated experience is there, and even from birth this delusion is there. If you take a baby and simulate dropping it, it clutches. This clinging to death is there even in a baby, and even in every creature. And so, pair of opposites pertaining to pleasure and pain, that should come next. But among the pairs of opposites, the desire for the one and aversion for the other are the foes, the enemies, really, of the seekers of knowledge and devotion. These foes have to be conquered, so the next question is, how do we conquer them? What do they do? who have got over the pairs of opposites, their path to perfection is now portrayed in this stanza. Yesham tvantangatam papam jnanam punya karmanam te dvanda mohani mukta bhajanti mam drita vritaha. But those men are virtuous deeds whose sins have come to an end, who are freed from the delusion of the pairs of opposites. They worship me, remaining steadfast in their vows. It is the steadiness of practice and the steadiness of commitment that is necessary. Because if you go and do one thing temporarily, you're enthusiastic about your devotion, spiritual practice, etc., for half an hour, and then the next day for nothing, you won't get any result. Just as the same as in every endeavor, you won't get any result through erratic practice. But it's not just that. A habit has now been formed. It's not just the practice, it's going beyond the practice now. And the practice, that state is gotten by virtuous deeds. A spirit of service, a generosity of spirit for the whole of mankind. And the sins have come to an end. In other words, the fruits of their karma have been played out. They are freed from this delusion of pairs and opposites, They no longer have the strategy of moving toward the one and avoiding the other and playing the game like that. They're now, as it were, standing outside in a position of freedom and observing these things and operating within the context that they are given without any attachment. So they worship me when and how? Remaining steadfast in their vows continuously, that means. Not deviating at all. Not just with a steadiness of intention, but now with a well-established habit. They only who remain unruffled and unaffected by these pairs of opposites. And that's the characteristic. Somebody who is not disturbed by any of these opposites, hot or cold, praise or blame, good fortune, bad fortune, success, failure, none of these pairs of opposites affect them in any way. Why should they? They're sitting in an area, as it were, that is always full and free and perfect. Always accepting, content with what little come their way, says the 12th chapter. 12th chapter of this Bhagavad Gita is the final chapter on the subject of Bhakti Yoga. And there we find, at the end, a whole list, he who hates none, who is friends of all, and so on. It goes on like that. Who is not affected by this or that, by what happens which is good, what we interpret as good, what is not good, what is fortunate, was not fortunate. Having no home because the whole world is his home. Having that kind of shift of attitude makes a difference. We have to learn to evaluate the world from the point of view of a detached area where all these things are operating in terms of opposites. And so, in Arjun's context, not worrying about victory or defeat. When will I be victorious in spiritual life? You fall into the trap. When will I be successful in this worship of the Lord? You fell into the trap of the pairs of opposites. So, gain and loss, praise and censure, life and death become steadfast in their vows. Worship of the Lord is possible to such dedicated souls. How will I perfect my worship? By concentrating only on this Lord, and by doing that, all the other things and concerns fall away. One life that was studied recently, and I gave it at the retreat there, because I wanted to give a life of a German saint, was Mechthild of Magdeburg, and leaving some extreme disciplines of her life aside, she phrased this divine love of God in human terms, literally. Sri Ramakrishna did the same thing. That is, she made Christ, in her case, a bridegroom, and she became the bride. Exactly that bhava that Ramakrishna practiced, Radha, Krishna, that kind of thing, becoming the handmaid of the Lord, if you will. So she writes a beautiful poem. I can't remember it literally, but I'll paraphrase it. She was asked in a vision by saints, when will you join our dance, heavenly dance? She says, I won't dance with you. I'll only dance with the Lord. And then he must ask me. He has to ask me and take me by the hand, and then only will I agree to dance with him. This is the kind of language she was using. Beautiful thing. So look at that wonderful culmination of a yearning heart that continues in a joyful, worshipful mode, a kind of state of ecstatic joy. So the next question is then, we see what Sri Ramakrishna also has to say this. He says, a rusty piece of iron is not actively susceptible to magnetization. But when you clean off the rust, then it readily responds. In that same way, similarly, in that mind which has become rusty with attachment and aversion and likes and dislikes, devotion to the Lord does not dawn. Whereas in a pure mind, bhakti rises readily. Why cannot I not see the Lord? Why does he withhold his vision? Well, is your mind clean enough to reflect it? Is it pure? Is the rust gone? And cleaning it one day, did you take the trouble to remove the rust the next day? You see this gate outside. In the summer we'll have to repaint it because the rust there is there on the bolt. And if we leave it there, what will happen is the whole thing ultimately will just fall away. So we have to remove that rust and repaint it at some point. Rust is something that, it's an oxidation of iron. In that same way, Sri Ramakrishna has put this beautiful example of rust. To say, cleaning once will not be enough. You have to do maintenance on it and make sure it is always in a rust-free condition. So similarly, he says, in that mind which has become rusty with attachment and aversion, that's the cause of the rust, is the attachment and the aversion. This pairs of opposite, moving toward a thing, away from something. Likes, dislikes. Devotion to the Lord does not dawn. What is the nature of the understanding of those who, while being devoted to the Lord, take a realistic view of life? This all sounds very well, but is there a realistic view of life that we can also take? So the explanation comes like this. What for the ordinary person? It's all very well to talk about saints and to talk about their lofty position. Don't forget, all these saints were ordinary people. That's why it's very useful to study the lives of the saint devotees of the incarnations, or simply the saints which were not always saintly. Ordinary people caught up in this duality of attraction and aversion. What did they do? If they could attain something, why not us? But it takes concentrated effort. And that is why only a few is what he mentions. So, why only a few? Well, why did only a few people successfully climb Mount Everest to the top? Of course it's increasing, but there was a time when hardly anybody could do it. But even now, if you try and do it, it requires training. It requires severe discipline. It requires regularity of training and practice. It requires acclimatizing yourself. It requires resolve in the first place. And the resolve has to be unshakable so that for 5 years you can have this goal in mind and train toward it. So for the ordinary person, what? It's a very simple formula in devotion. Yara marana mokshaya mam ashritya yatantiye te brahma tad viduha kritsnam adhyatman karma cha kilam. For liberation from old age and death, what will we do? Those who take refuge in me, he says, and strive for deliverance from decay and death. That really is the goal. Decay and death, let's get over it. They realize in full that Brahman, that final full consciousness, the individual self, and all karma, they get over that. They get delivered from that. So let's review that again. So what we'd have to do? Take refuge. Now when it rains here, no, we don't have to have a book to tell us that if there's a shelter, we can take refuge under the shelter. That makes sense. But most people are not as sensible as that. They're sensible in terms of rain, but when it comes from pain, where will you take refuge? So people take refuge in all kinds of places. If they're caught up with this duality of attraction, aversion, they will try to find their happiness in, you can name it, whatever the senses enjoy, thinking that that will resolve the issue. Of course it won't. Going along the lines of the genetic dispositions that Maya has given us, or nature has given us, the two genetic directives to continue procreating, continuing the species on the one hand, and on the other hand, making sure we survive at any cost. Now most biological species do it simply by eating and drinking and so on, but humans have taken it to a different level, and so we can increase our enjoyment in these activities also. And so this is where most people are taking refuge in. But the recommendation is here, take refuge in me, because I'm the one source of all these things. And if you take refuge in the minor deities, as mentioned previously, please recognize all the fulfillment has actually come from me. Your lack of recognition of this, even though you got it, is assisting in your delusion. Ignorance is mentioned. So, not only taking refuge in me, but striving for deliverance from decay and death, keeping this in mind. Then of course they realize in full the whole idea, not even partially, in full, that Brahman is mentioned like that because Jnana Yoga will produce the same thing through knowledge. But here you get this fullness of realization through this devotion. The mind of man may take its own time to go through this process and be aware that this formula of trying to get a resolution to your happiness and so on is by engaging these pairs of opposites. But there are the other two factors in life, and that is decay and death. So one is sustaining life, but the other factor is looming. Decay we know about as with advancing years. And as that decay settles in, death comes on the horizon, and still we become deluded. But he can never escape from their clutches. To lose one's hard-earned vigor and to become a prey to death, are these the end of human life? At some stage or other, this valuation has to take place. To do deeds of rarity, to achieve the impossible, and then to quit the world as if in banishment, is this the reward of life on earth? In books on, such books as the Tibetan Book of the Dead and so on, and the author, commentators will mention, the person departing this life is losing everything. The person who's surviving, the relative, is losing one person. But the person dying is losing their bank account, their house, their property, all their family, their family's family, the capacity to see the sunrise in the morning, all of this is a great bereavement for them if they take it like that. So, is this the end? We have to understand. And looking at people who are dying and still clutching on to life is a very tragic scene to witness. Death drives man to the necessity of raising questions of this philosophical type about birth and life and death does not allow him to be dormant. It gives him rude knocks and wakes him up to realities with which he is not acquainted. And my old story, of course, of is there really such a thing as death? Because the German retreat is fresh in my mind. I gave that story, which I'd heard for the first time, but you'll hear it now again and probably multiple times in the future. Supposing this body dies, as it will, and you decide, we didn't know what to do with the Swami because, you see, he never left anything in his will. So what we'll do is we'll give him a decent burial. And so they put this body into the ground, and it doesn't end there because the story continues. The body will become food for worms. And worms are useful. They aerate the soil. And the body breaks down and becomes part of the soil, and somebody plants potatoes there. And somebody takes the potatoes and munch and crunch on them. They have no idea they're eating the Swami. So is there such a thing as death is a good philosophical question too, because science will tell us nothing is created or destroyed. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just a transformation, one form into another, that's all. But it has these problems. And this cycle is called samsara. To get out of it is to get their freedom. So, death does not allow him to be dormant. It gives him rude shocks and wakes him up to realities with which he is not acquainted. And when the right inquiries are thereby made, the sadhaka, spiritual aspirant, comes to know the truths about Brahman, about himself, and about karma. And so, nature has a way of driving us by having these issues of birth, life, and death. And by having these issues in between, in the life portion, of ups and downs. Probably more downs than ups. Although most people are optimistically inclined to think that there are more ups and downs, only because to think of those pessimistic areas in our life is more painful, and so we avoid it. There's an old example that I remember from a child's encyclopedia, and it just stood out in my mind because it came with a picture that when we think back on memories, we like to think of the occasion where we went up on the stage of a school and received a prize. We don't like to think of on the way how we tripped and fell and embarrassed ourselves. Only the giving of the prize portion we retained. The rest we dismissed. Sri Ramakrishna says this: when a man wants to eat a fruit, he discards its shell and seeds and helps himself to the pulp. But when he wants to purchase that fruit or make a study of it, he has to take into account the shell, the seeds, the pulp, and all the contents of the fruit. And very much like this, the seeker of God negates the world and goes to him. But after God realization, he concludes that it is all the one thing, it is Brahman, that puts on the appearance of the universe and all beings in it. Now, although we exceeded our time, because we're near the end of this chapter, it's good to finish it off. And it gives us the start of a number of questions in the next chapter, which is the 8th chapter. Sadi bhutadi devam mam sadi yajnam chaye viduhu prayan akali picha mam te viduhu yukta chetasaha. Those who realize me in the Adibhuta, in the Adi Deva and in the Adi Yajna, they of steadfast mind realize me even in the hour of death, which we've been discussing. So these various terms will be explained in the next chapter. And then we finish off then this chapter by Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastri Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Jnana Vijnana Yogo Nam Saptamo Dhyayaha. In the Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita, the knowledge of Brahman, the supreme, the science of yoga, and the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. This is the seventh discourse, designated the yoga of knowledge and realization. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.